Hi, this is Andrew from American Artisan. In this video I'd like to show you my preferred method for cutting tenons on the table saw. We'll be using it for our project, the splayed dovetail stool. We've taken the time to cut our dovetails by hand. I really feel that adds beauty to a project, but I often tell people you know, the only way you can tell if a mortise and tenon was cut by hand is if somehow you did it wrong. I see no need to add the extra time to the project to cut the mortise and tenon by hand. I prefer to cut my mortises with a plunge router. You can see a link for a video for that in the description below. And in this video we're going to be cutting the tenon on the table saw. Some people like to use a tenoning jig for this. I find that's great for angle tenons, but when you're doing a straight tenon like this, the tenoning jig doesn't cut the haunch, the notch on the ends. You're left having to do that on a separate method. For our straight tenons, using the stacked dado with the sacrificial fence and our miter gauge, we're able to set it up and use the same setup to cut our haunches as well, and maybe only have to modify the height of the blade, but keep the shoulder the same by leaving the fence of the table saw in the same position. I'm doing a 1-inch long tenon. I've set the fence for that position. That's going to allow this tenon to pierce through, because this is going to be a wedged tenon, and we'll show you how to cut the wedges without splitting in a separate video. I'm cutting 2 of them. I'm making 2 of these stools. I have a piece of scrap that I'm going to set everything up for. We'll start cutting that now, and then when we have it done, we'll go ahead and cut our final tenons. So before I get too far into it, I've made a quick test cut. I want to make sure the length of my tenon is correct. That's measuring at about 1 inch. And then I also want to make sure that my shoulder is square. When I cut my piece to length, I made sure that was square. But if my miter gauge isn't sitting at 90 degrees, it could throw my shoulder off. If my shoulder isn't square, I'm not going to get an even shoulder all the way around. I'll end up with some jaggedness, and it won't seat properly on the final piece, and I'll get a gap. So I used the side that was against the fence of the miter gauge and put my square on there, and that looks nice and square. It's worth taking a moment to check that now before I get too far in. Now I'm going to make a cut on each side and slowly cut until that tenon fits in there perfectly. It lets me creep up on the measurement, which is nice, and also it makes it perfectly centered. So I've made a few passes. Each time I adjusted it up a little at a time, locking it each time. And we have a moment here to kind of see what type of fit we want. So I can get this in. If I push really hard, I'd almost need a mallet to drive this in. This is much too tight a fit. It could cause either the tailboard to crack or make it so we can't seat it down all the way. I want to take a little bit more off, and I need to be aware now that as I'm doing this, each time I move that saw blade up, whatever amount I move it up, it's getting double because I'm taking it off of each side. So I'm really going to be moving it just a fraction of a turn each time until I can get this piece so it drops in with easily, but doesn't come out when turned on its side. So I made a few more adjustments to my height, moving it a very small amount and locking it each time. I'd hate to have what I want and then lock it and then find the act of locking it moved it a little bit. But what I want, see how this drives in easily? But when I turn it sideways, it doesn't fall out. That gives me enough room for glue, but it's not so tight that it'll crack when I install it. I'm going to go ahead on my final pieces and cut my tenon, and then after that we'll deal with our haunch. So I've cut my tenons on each piece, and now I'm ready to go ahead and deal with my haunch. And notice that I checked it each time. When you're new to this, you may be applying more or less hand pressure each time. It's worth checking just to build your own consistency as your skills advance with mortise and tenon. So I'm going back to my sample piece because I don't want to make any mistakes on my final piece. And all I'm changing here now is the height of the blade. There's no need to change the fence or change the miter gauge. By keeping the fence in the same position, we'll get that nice, clean, consistent shoulder. So let's make a test cut. I'm not going to cut all the way. I'm going to make a test cut and see if it fits. And when I have something I like, I'm going to make my final cut. One thing to keep in mind that with this project, I will be wedging the tenon in another video, so I want to leave a little bit of room for that tenon to flare out. That's what's going to keep it nice and tight. So I need some room for the wedge. So let's make our test cut. So you can see here with my test cut from my first setting that I still have some material to move. That's why we'll always run all of our tenons before running all of our haunches, because there may be some slight variation there. The fence position changes, but the height may change. So let's go ahead and find the correct height setting for our haunch. So for our wedge tenon, I feel like this is a good spacing. We have a strong 32nd on either side for our wedge to expand. And with a little bit of wiggling, that pierces all the way through. That way, when we wedge it and then trim it flush, we have some wood on either side of our flush trim saw to make trimming it flush a little bit easier. Now that I have that set, I'm going to go ahead and continue on my final pieces. So that's my preferred method for cutting tenons on the table saw. Thanks for watching this video. Subscribe for more woodworking videos.